The drawing room at Marwick Hall held the particular stillness of a late autumn evening, when everything outside has gone dark and everything inside has not yet decided what it is. The fire had been built up against the cold, and the light it threw was the warm, unsteady kind that made faces look younger than they were, and shadows longer than they should be. Henry Ainsley stood near the mantelpiece with a glass of sherry he had not tasted, his silver hair catching the firelight, his posture still carrying the authority of a man who had managed 4,000 acres and 200 tenants for nearly 30 years without once losing his composure in public. Charlotte watched him from across the room, the straight back, the easy smile when the vicar said something mildly amusing. And she watched also the thing behind the smile that the vicar could not see. She had been watching it for 6 months. Tonight it would not hold. The vicar, a round and well-meaning man who had christened both their children, set down his sherry glass and raised it again in the same gesture, already composing his toast. Lady Helena sat in the high-backed chair nearest the fire, upright and impeccable at 71, her rings catching the light each time she lifted her own glass. It was a small, pleasant evening. Nothing more than that. The kind of evening Marwick had hosted 100 times. Charlotte had no reason, standing there in her gray silk, to feel the particular tightening she felt in the base of her throat. "Come then," the vicar said, with the warmth of a man who had known this household for 20 years. "A toast to the lady of the house. Henry, remind this old memory of mine. Your wife's full name, for the record." Henry smiled. The smile was the one Charlotte had watched him produce at tenant dinners and county assemblies and parliamentary receptions. The smile that had never once looked like effort, because for 30 years it had not been. His eyes went to Charlotte's face. 3 seconds passed. They were not long seconds, in the way that time is measured. But the fire crackled once, and Lady Helena's rings went still, and the vicar's glass remained half raised. And in those 3 seconds, Charlotte understood with a clarity that left no room for softening that this was not the first time this week. It was the third. She set down her own glass with a steadiness she did not feel in her hands, and said, in a voice that was quiet enough to carry only to Henry, "Charlotte. Charlotte Ainsley." Then she looked at him directly. "You'll want to remember it." Lady Helena reached for the bell on the side table, the small silver bell she rang for the footman when a situation required managing. Henry's hand on his sherry glass was shaking, not visibly, not enough for the vicar to notice. But Charlotte noticed because she had been noticing everything for 6 months, and she was very tired of noticing alone. She excused herself with the composure she had worn every day of her marriage like a second dress, told the vicar the evening air had given her a headache, wished Lady Helena a pleasant drive home, and left the drawing room without looking back at her husband's face. She did not return for dinner. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a long time, because her legs would not quite hold her. And she let herself remember, just once, just briefly, Henry's hand at the small of her back on the chapel steps 28 years ago, steadying her on the stone as she came down into the sunlight. The last time he had touched her with that quality of attention had been perhaps 2 years ago. She could not now remember the occasion, only the absence of it since. She did not weep. She sat until her legs steadied, and then she went to the small locked drawer of her writing desk and took out a notebook. The notebook had been started 6 months earlier, on a Tuesday morning in April. It was a plain thing. Dark blue boards, no inscription. And Charlotte had bought it at the stationer's in the village without knowing precisely why. Only that she needed somewhere to put what she was seeing that was not inside her own head. The first entry read, April 14th, Breakfast. He called me Margaret. Corrected himself at once. Said he had been thinking of the Hartley estate. I let it pass. The second entry, 2 weeks later, April 29th. The East Field accounts. He lost the figure for the drainage repairs, a figure he has carried in his head since 1861. He found it again after a moment. He did not look at me when he found it. The entries continued in that manner. Dated, brief, specific. A hesitation over the name of the new vicar's wife. An afternoon when he had walked into the morning room and stood for a moment as though uncertain why he had come. A dinner party at which he had introduced Charlotte to a neighbor's wife they had known for 15 years, as though the introduction were new. Each entry written in Charlotte's even hand, with no commentary, no interpretation, only the date and the fact. She had not shown the notebook to anyone. She had not confronted Henry with it. She had waited, with a patience that had cost her more than anyone in the household could see, for Henry to come to her with whatever he was carrying. He was a man who had always come to her with things. The estate difficulties, the worries about Thomas's commission, the quiet grief when his father died. For 26 years the door between them had stood open. She had waited for him to walk through it. He had not come. 3 mornings after the dinner with the vicar, Henry knocked on the door of her morning room. Charlotte was at her writing desk, with her garden journal open, though she had not been writing in it. She had been watching the frost on the east lawn and thinking about nothing she could have named. "Come in," she said. Henry entered and stood near the window in the way he stood when he was preparing to say something formal. He had tried 2 days of small civilities, inquiring after her headache, remarking on the weather, asking whether she had heard from Caroline. Charlotte had received each of these with the same even distance, answering what was asked and offering nothing further. He looked, she thought, like a man who had been sleeping badly. "Are you angry with me?" he asked. "No," Charlotte said. She closed the garden journal. Anger would mean I still expected better. I stopped expecting better some time ago, which is a different thing entirely. Henry said quietly, "Charlotte, I am going to Bath," she said, "to stay with Augusta. I need some time away from Marwick." A pause. "How long?" "I don't know." "Are you—" He stopped. He tried again. "Are you leaving me?" Charlotte looked at him steadily, the way she had looked at him across the drawing room 3 nights before, and said what she had been carrying since April. "You left first, Henry. 18 months ago, you left. And I have been here keeping the chair warm and waiting for you to come back and tell me where you had gone. You haven't told me, so I am going to Bath." Henry stood at the window with the frost-white lawn behind him and said nothing. Charlotte watched his face for the thing she had been watching for. The opening, the breath before the sentence, the moment a man finally decides to speak the truth he has been holding. She had watched for it every day for 6 months. It did not come. She stepped into the carriage before the week was out, with her maid and 2 trunks and the blue notebook at the bottom of her traveling case. Henry stood on the graveled drive in the November cold and watched her go. He did not follow. Augusta's townhouse on Royal Crescent was tall and narrow and lit differently from Marwick. Not the managed firelight of a country estate, but the brighter, more various light of a city in full winter season, with street lamps below the windows and the reflected glow of 100 other houses pressed close on either side. The street outside was loud at all hours with carriage traffic and vendors and the particular human noise of a city that does not go entirely quiet even at midnight. The bells of the Bath Abbey carried on the wind every quarter hour, day and night, which Charlotte had not expected and which she found, after the first week, she did not mind at all. Augusta was 5 years a widow and had arranged her life accordingly, her own hours, her own opinions, her own breakfast table set for one. She was 4 years older than Charlotte and had the particular composure of a woman who has learned that her own company is sufficient. She asked no questions when Charlotte arrived. She said, "Your room is the one at the back, away from the street. Breakfast at 8, or whenever you like. The pump room opens at 7. Then she went back to the book she was reading. Charlotte had not lived inside this much noise or this much freedom simultaneously since before her marriage. In the mornings, they took the waters at the pump room, moving through the crowded, warm, mineral-scented rooms among the season's full population of invalids and fashionable visitors and people who had come to Bath simply because it was spring and they could. In the afternoons, they walked Sydney Gardens, where the paths were wide and the company was various, and no one required Charlotte to be the Countess of Marwick. She began, slowly and with something that felt almost like embarrassment, to discover what she preferred when no one was watching. She found she liked her breakfast later than 8, closer to 9. She found she preferred the back rooms of Augusta's house to the front ones, where the street noise was loudest. She found she liked to sit with no book and no needlework for an hour in the afternoon, doing nothing at all, which was something she had not done since before Caroline was born. She found she was not undone by being alone. She found, turning this over carefully like an object she had never examined before, that she did not entirely know what to do with that. Henry wrote. The first letters arrived within the week, formal, careful, written in his estate account hand rather than the looser script he used for personal correspondence. He asked about the journey. He asked after Augusta's health. He made 2 remarks about the Bath roads that suggested he had been reading a guidebook. Charlotte replied briefly and factually, 2 sentences per letter, as though responding to an inquiry from a solicitor. Then, on a gray morning in late February, a card arrived at Royal Crescent from the York House Hotel. Henry had taken rooms there. He was in Bath. He had not written to request permission to call. He had simply arrived and sent a card that said only, "I am here. I will not press." H. Charlotte sat with the card for a long time. Then she wrote back, "Pump room, Thursday, 9 o'clock. He was there before her. She saw him across the crowded room as she came in with Augusta, standing near one of the tall windows in his traveling coat, looking older than she had let herself remember, and watching the door. When he saw her, his expression did not change in any way she could have described. He simply became more still. They sat at a small table among 40 other visitors and drank the sulphurous waters in a silence that lasted most of the half-hour. The room was loud enough that silence was not conspicuous. They exchanged perhaps 30 words. He asked whether the rooms at Royal Crescent were comfortable. She said they were. He said the York House Hotel had a very good dining room. She said she was glad to hear it. When she stood to leave, the room had grown more crowded, and a woman with an overfull glass moved between them in the narrow space, jostling Charlotte's arm. Henry's hand went immediately to her elbow, instinctive, certain, the reflex of a man who had steadied this particular person for 28 years. He did not release it for the half-second longer than the steadying required. Charlotte did not pull away. They parted on the pavement without mentioning it. A second pump room visit followed 10 days later, and a third the week after, a walk in Sydney Gardens at Charlotte's suggestion, where the paths were wide enough to walk side by side without the enforced proximity of a crowded room. Henry asked about Augusta's health. He asked, without prompting, how Augusta had managed in the years since her husband's death, and he remembered, Charlotte noticed this clearly, the name of Augusta's late husband, the year he had died, and the particular difficulty of the estate settlement that had followed. These were details from a conversation Charlotte had mentioned to Henry perhaps 3 years ago, in passing, over dinner. He had remembered. Here, at least, in this city, in these careful meetings. He had been paying attention. She walked beside him through Sydney Gardens and felt, for the first time in 18 months, something that was not entirely grief. She did not name it. He still had not told her the truth. She had not yet asked the question that would force it from him. They walked back to Royal Crescent and parted at the gate. And Charlotte went inside and sat with Augusta over tea and said nothing at all, which Augusta received without comment, as she received everything. The fourth visit came on a late afternoon in April, when the sky had been bright all morning and turned without warning at 3 o'clock. Henry had called at Royal Crescent, and they had walked down to the Abbey Yard together and back, talking of Thomas's regiment and Caroline's house in Edinburgh, and the small, ordinary details of children grown and living their own lives. The rain came in from the west, while they were still 10 minutes from Royal Crescent. Not a gentle shower, but the sudden, cold, committed kind that soaks through a coat in minutes. Henry hailed a sedan chair at the corner and held the door open. "Get in," he said. "It's barely 5 minutes," Charlotte said. "You'll be drenched. And you'll be drenched if you walk it. Get in, Charlotte." "I will not sit in a closed chair for 5 minutes while you walk in the rain beside it like a footman. That is ridiculous. There is room for 2. Henry looked at her. Then he got in. It was the first enclosed space they had shared in 2 months. Their knees touched immediately. The chair was not designed for 2 adults of any size. And there was nowhere to look that was not the other person's face or the narrow paneled walls on either side. Charlotte kept her gaze on the small rain-blurred window. Henry kept his gaze on his hands, and then, after a moment, on her hand resting on the seat between them. He did not reach for it. Charlotte was aware of the distance between his hand and hers, aware of it with a precision that surprised her, the way one is sometimes surprised by the clarity of an old sensation. She registered that he had not reached across that half-inch. She registered also that she had noticed, which meant she had been watching his hand, which meant something she was not yet prepared to examine in a sedan chair in the rain in Bath. They arrived at Royal Crescent. Henry helped her down and stood for a moment on the wet pavement while she went up the steps. He did not come in. She did not invite him. The door closed between them, and Charlotte went upstairs to change out of her wet things. And that evening at supper, Augusta asked no questions. Charlotte found she had nothing to report, only the distance of half an inch and the fact that she had measured it, and found that this, too, meant something she could not yet name. Caroline arrived on a Tuesday morning in May, unannounced, travel-worn from the overnight coach from Edinburgh, with her hair coming loose from its pins and a sealed letter in her coat pocket that she did not produce immediately. She had come, she said, because Thomas had written from his regiment. A worried letter, brief in the way Thomas's letters were always brief, saying only that their mother had gone to Bath, and their father would not explain why, and the household at Marwick felt strange. Thomas could not leave his post. Caroline could. Charlotte sat with her daughter in Augusta's parlor and poured tea and waited, because Caroline had the look of a person carrying something heavier than a long journey. "I stopped at Marwick first," Caroline said. "Father asked me last month to find the deed for the Holt property. There was some question about the boundary survey. I went to look through the estate correspondence." She set her teacup down. "I found something else." She took the letter from her coat pocket and placed it on the table between them. It was a sealed envelope, addressed to Henry in a London physician's hand. The seal had not been broken. On the back, in Henry's own writing. Charlotte knew that hand as well as she knew her own. 5 words had been written. "Burn this. I will tell her when I am ready." Charlotte looked at the envelope for a long moment. She did not pick it up. She asked when it had been sent. 8 months ago, Caroline said. It was filed with the estate papers. I don't think he meant to keep it there. I think he forgot he'd put it there. Charlotte stood and moved the letter to the small table beside the parlor window, where it sat in the pale May light like an ordinary object. "Leave it there," she said. "I'll see to it." That night, Charlotte did not sleep. She came downstairs at 3 in the morning and found Caroline in the parlor armchair, still dressed, her head fallen sideways in exhausted sleep, the teacups from the afternoon still on the table. Charlotte took the shawl from the back of the sofa and laid it over her daughter with the careful hands of a woman who had done this when Caroline was 4 years old and had not done it since. Then she sat in the opposite chair, in the dark, with the sealed envelope in her lap. She did not open it. She did not set it aside. She sat with it through the dark hours while the Abbey bells marked each quarter hour and the street outside went through its brief, incomplete silence. And she thought about a man writing, "I will tell her when I am ready," on the back of a letter he then filed and forgot. And she thought about 18 months of mornings at the Marwick breakfast table. And she thought about a notebook with dated entries in her own handwriting that she had kept because she was waiting for him to come to her. 80 miles south, Henry was also awake. He was at his desk in the Marwick study. She would know this without being told, because he had always gone to his desk when he could not sleep. He was writing his daily list. She did not know yet that he kept daily lists, or what they meant, or why. She would learn. Tonight, at his desk in the study she had sat in 1,000 times, he was writing, "Charlotte, Caroline, Thomas, Marwick, the garden." The word for garden. He wrote the word for garden because the word had gone that morning, and he had needed to sit for a full minute before it came back. In the morning, Charlotte opened the letter with Caroline sitting beside her on the small settee, their shoulders touching. She read it twice, holding it level and steady. Then she folded it along its original crease and set it on the table, and told her daughter, in a quiet and even voice, what it contained. Caroline wept. The sudden, helpless weeping of a young woman who had prepared herself for something difficult and found it more difficult than she had prepared for. Charlotte did not weep. She put her arm around her daughter and held her and looked at the wall above the fireplace and thought about what came next. She considered writing to Henry. She sat at Augusta's writing desk the following afternoon with paper and pen and composed the opening sentence 3 times in her head, and each time she stopped herself before she wrote it down. If she told him she had read the letter, whatever happened between them would happen because she had forced it, because he had been found out. That was not what she needed. Whatever Henry did next must come from his own choice to finally speak the truth he had been carrying for 18 months, not from being cornered, not from being told that his careful concealment had failed. The words, when they came, must be his. She put the pen down. She did not write. 2 weeks later, Lady Helena arrived at Royal Crescent in a hired carriage, unannounced, wearing her traveling coat and the particular expression she wore when she had decided that a situation required her direct management. She had heard from the Marwick housekeeper. She said this without any apparent awareness that this was a remarkable thing to admit. That things were not well between Charlotte and Henry, and she had come to address the matter. Augusta received her in the front parlor with perfect courtesy, and then found a reason to be elsewhere. You have been in Bath for 4 months, Lady Helena said, once the tea was poured and the civilities were done. Henry is alone at Marwick. Whatever difficulty has arisen between you, your duty is to return. Is it? Charlotte said. Husbands grow strange as they age. It is not comfortable, but it is not extraordinary. A good wife endures. Charlotte set down her teacup. She looked at Lady Helena with the same quiet register she had used in the drawing room the night of the dinner. Not cold, not heated, simply precise. I have been enduring for 18 months, she said. I endured without complaint and without explanation, because I trusted that Henry would come to me when he was ready. My enduring has cost me 18 months of a marriage I valued. And it very nearly cost me the only thing I would have wanted, which was the chance to be his partner in whatever he was facing, rather than a person he was protecting himself from. I am not going to be advised to endure further by someone who does not know what she is asking me to endure. Lady Helena opened her mouth. I am not angry with Henry, Charlotte continued. I want to be clear about that. But I am not returning to Marwick on the terms that have governed the last 18 months. When the terms change, I will come home. Lady Helena left without finishing her tea. Charlotte watched the hired carriage pull away from the Crescent, and then went upstairs and stood at her bedroom window for a long time, looking at the rooftops. 3 weeks after Caroline's arrival, Henry called at Royal Crescent a 5th time. Charlotte received him in Augusta's small library, which was the quietest room in the house, away from the street. He came in with the look of a man who had rehearsed something, and then lost the rehearsal on the way up the stairs. I have something I need to tell you, he said. Then sit down, Charlotte said, and tell me. He sat. He looked at his hands. He looked at the bookshelves. He opened his mouth twice and closed it twice. Charlotte waited, not leaning forward, not offering him the sentence he needed, not making it easier in any way, because the words had to be his, and she had already made too many things easier for too long. She waited through 5 minutes, and then 10, and then 20, watching him try and fail and try again, watching a man who had always known exactly what to say discover that this particular sentence would not be found by searching for it. After nearly an hour, Henry stood. His face was the color of old stone. I am sorry, he said. I have wasted your afternoon. And he walked out of the library and out of the front door and into the street. Charlotte sat in the empty library for a long time after he left. Then, that night, alone in her room with the house quiet around her, she permitted herself to weep. Not for Henry, not for the diagnosis in the sealed letter, not for the marriage she had spent 4 months in Bath trying to understand. She wept for the man Henry had been 18 months ago, before whatever this was had taken hold of him. The man who would have come to her in the morning room and sat down and said, Charlotte, I need to tell you something, and I need you to help me. That man would have spoken. That man would not have needed an hour in a library to find the beginning. She wept for him briefly and privately. And then she stopped, because weeping for what was gone did not help with what remained. At York House Hotel, Henry sat at the writing desk in his room and did not sleep. He had tried to speak. He had sat in that library for an hour and tried to find the sentence that would open the door. And the sentence had not come. Not because he did not know what to say, but because every time he reached for the beginning, he reached also for the image of Charlotte's face in the moment she understood what he was telling her, and he could not get past that image. He pulled a sheet of paper toward him. He did not compose what he was about to write. He simply began. The breakfast room at Marwick has one chair at the table now. I moved the other one to the wall because sitting opposite an empty chair was worse than not having it there. I walk past your morning room twice a day, once in the morning and once before I go to bed. And I don't know why I do it, except that the door is still closed, and the closed door is somehow more present than the room was when you were in it. 3 weeks ago, I could not remember whether Thomas's name was Thomas or Theodore. I sat at my desk for 4 minutes. It came back. I wrote it down. I write everything down now. I am not writing to ask you to come back. I am writing because I sat in Augusta's library today for an hour, and I could not give you the beginning of the sentence you have been waiting for. And I think you deserve to know why, even if I can only find the words on paper at midnight, when no one is watching. He wrote for another hour. He did not revise any of it. At midnight, he went downstairs in his dressing gown and gave the sealed letter to the night porter with instructions to post it before 7 in the morning, before he could change his mind. Charlotte read the letter 3 times the next morning, standing at the window of her bedroom with the Bath Street sounds rising from below. Then she sat at the writing desk and wrote 4 words on a sheet of paper. Come Tuesday. Tell me. Augusta went out on Tuesday evening at Charlotte's request, saying only that she would be at Mrs. Prentice's card party and would not return before 10. Charlotte placed the physician's letter on the small table between the 2 chairs in the front parlor, where it would be visible when Henry arrived, but where she would not have to produce it as evidence. She wanted it there simply because she would not pretend any more that she did not know. Henry arrived at 7. He came in quietly, without the formal posture she associated with his visits to Royal Crescent, and stood in the parlor doorway looking at her, and then at the letter on the table. He looked at it for a moment, and then he sat down in the chair across from her, without being invited. Charlotte waited until he had settled. Then she asked her question, in the same slow, even voice she had used to say her own name in the Marwick drawing room 8 months before. The voice that was not cold, but that would not be hurried. Tell me, in your own words, what you have been afraid of. Henry looked at the fire. He looked at his hands. And then, at last, he looked at her. The first appointment was in September of 1878, he said. I had been losing words for about 6 months. Small ones at first, proper names, figures I should have known. I told myself it was fatigue. The physician in London said it was not fatigue. He said it was the early stage of something that would progress. He could not tell me how quickly. He stopped. He wrote it in a letter. I brought the letter home and I put it in the estate correspondence, and I wrote on the back of it that I would tell you when I was ready. I know, Charlotte said. Henry looked at her steadily. How long have you known? 6 weeks. I kept a notebook before that. Incidents, dated. I have known something was wrong for nearly a year. She did not raise her voice. What I did not know was that you had a diagnosis and had chosen not to tell me. Henry put his face in his hands briefly, then lowered them. I could not find the word for garden, he said. On a Thursday morning in March, I stood at the study window looking at the east garden, and I could not find the word for what I was looking at. It came back in a minute. But I sat there for that minute, and I thought, this is what it will be. This is what is coming. And I thought about you watching it happen. And you decided I should not, Charlotte said. I decided. He stopped. He began again, and this time the words came differently, without the controlled precision she recognized from 30 years of watching him manage difficult conversations. I have run this estate since I was 31. I have managed everything. The tenants, the accounts, the children's educations, Helena's widowhood, your father's estate settlement when he died. I have been the person who handles things. That is what I am. That is the only version of myself I know how to be." He looked at the fire. "I could not bear to become a man you must care for. I could not bear to be that man in your sight. I did not hide the diagnosis to spare you. I hid it to spare myself the moment you would look at me and see what I am becoming." The room was quiet. The Abbey bells began their 8 o'clock sequence, distant and clear through the window glass. Charlotte let the silence hold for a moment. Then she said, "I know. And I want to tell you what the last 18 months have been from where I was standing." Henry looked at her. "I watched the man I love disappear by degrees," Charlotte said. "And I believed he was disappearing because something had changed between us. Because I had done something, or failed to do something, or simply because he had grown tired of me after 28 years. I sat at that breakfast table every morning and I told myself I was imagining it. I kept a notebook because keeping a notebook was something I could do when there was nothing else to do. I waited for you to come to me because in 26 years you had always come to me, and I trusted you to come to me with this." She paused. "You did not come, and I want you to understand what that cost me. Not the diagnosis, Henry. I could have borne the diagnosis. I am bearing it now, and I will continue to bear it. What I could not bear, and what I will not forgive easily, is that your pride stole from me the one thing I would have wanted. The chance to be beside you. Not behind you, not caring for you as though you were something broken I was tending. Beside you. As I have been for 28 years. Henry did not speak. His hands on the arms of the chair were very still. "You chose your own comfort over our marriage," Charlotte said. "I want you to know that I understand why. I understand the fear. I do not think you are a cruel man, but it was the cruelest thing you have ever done to me, and I need you to understand that before we go any further." Henry said quietly, "Yes, it was not an apology. It was something more accurate than an apology. A man acknowledging, without defense or qualification, that what had been said was true." Charlotte looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "These are my terms." He waited. "I will come back to Marwick. We will tell the children together, Thomas as well as Caroline, and we will tell them properly, not in pieces." She spoke steadily, without consulting any notes, because she had been composing this for 6 weeks. "We will see a second physician, not because I expect different news, but because I will be in the room when the news is given, and I will ask my own questions. We will rewrite the will. I will take up the powers of attorney you have been carrying alone. The estate accounts, the tenants, the correspondence. We will manage them together for as long as you are able, and I will manage them alone when you are not. And you will not make that harder than it already will be by pretending it isn't happening." Henry said nothing. "And whatever years remain," Charlotte said, "will be lived in full light. With your name said properly every morning, you can still say it, and held in my hand on the mornings you cannot." The fire settled. Outside, the street noise continued its ordinary bath evening. A carriage, voices, the distant bells fading on the air. "I don't deserve those terms," Henry said. "No," Charlotte agreed. "But they are not for your sake." Henry stayed until Augusta returned at 9:30, and then he took his leave and walked back to York House Hotel through the spring evening. And Charlotte sat with her sister over a glass of wine, and said only that Henry would be taking the morning coach south to make arrangements, and that she would be returning to Marwick within the fortnight. Augusta looked at her for a moment. "Good," she said, and refilled both glasses. In the morning, before the coach was called, Charlotte came down to the narrow back garden, a thin strip of city ground bordered by other people's walls, with sparrows moving in the ivy and the abbey bells beginning their 7 o'clock sequence. Henry was there already, standing at the gate with his traveling coat on, looking at the small square of pale sky above the rooftops. Charlotte came down the path and stopped him with her hand on his sleeve. She looked at him directly, not at the public face, not at the posture of a man who had managed things for 30 years, but at the face beneath that, which she had not seen clearly in a very long time. "Do you know who I am?" she asked. He met her gaze without deflection, without the polished ease that had always been his armor in difficult moments, and said, "Charlotte." A pause. "Charlotte Ainsley." Another pause, and then, "My wife." She kissed him once, slowly, in the thin morning light of Augusta's back garden, with the sparrows in the ivy and the bells of the abbey carrying over the rooftops. It was not the kiss of a reconciliation, not a return to what had been. It was the first moment of what little remained, chosen with full knowledge of what it contained, and entered into with open eyes. They returned to Marwick together within the fortnight. Caroline was told first, though she already knew, and she stood in the Marwick hallway and held her mother's hands for a long moment without speaking. Thomas came home on leave 3 weeks later, and when Henry told him in the study, simply, without the hour of failed attempts, because Charlotte was sitting beside him, and her presence had changed the architecture of the sentence. Thomas sat very still for a moment, and then put his face in his hands and wept the way young men weep when they have not yet learned to manage it. Charlotte crossed the room and held her son at his father's desk, and Henry watched them and said nothing, and the room held all three of them without requiring anyone to be composed. The second physician confirmed the first diagnosis. Charlotte sat beside Henry through the entire appointment and asked 4 questions that Henry had not thought to ask, and wrote the answers in a small notebook, not the blue one, which was at the bottom of her traveling case and would not be needed anymore, but a new one, purchased at the Bath stationer's the morning they left Royal Crescent. The solicitor's office in the county town was wood-paneled and smelled of old paper. And the solicitor was a careful man who had handled Marwick's legal affairs for 15 years. Charlotte sat at the table and read every document before she signed it, and when she took up the powers of attorney that Henry had carried alone for 30 years, her hand was steady. Lady Helena sent a letter, stiff, brief, written in the careful hand of a woman who has had to compose an apology without quite admitting she was wrong. Charlotte answered it the following morning in a tone that left no wound and required no response. The drawing room at Marwick was rearranged at Charlotte's direction. The furniture was pulled closer to the fire, where the light was better. Her small writing desk, which had lived in the morning room for 20 years, was moved to stand beside Henry's larger one, so that they worked side by side at the south window with the winter garden visible between them. A wide, low table was placed between the 2 desks, and on it, in plain sight, Henry's daily lists lay each morning when he had written them. He no longer kept them in the locked drawer. Charlotte no longer pretended she had not seen them. One summer later, the drawing room at Marwick held the long evening light of July, not the unsteady firelight of late autumn, but the clear, full, golden light of a day that had been warm since morning, and was only now, past 8 o'clock, beginning to soften at the edges. The children had visited for a fortnight and gone back to their own lives, leaving behind the particular quiet of a house that has been full, and is now itself again. Henry was in his chair by the window with the book Charlotte had been reading aloud, a novel Caroline had sent from Edinburgh, which they had been working through for 3 weeks. Charlotte sat opposite him, her feet tucked up, her shawl around her shoulders despite the warmth, because she had always run cold in the evenings. Henry closed the book when the chapter ended and set it on the table between them. Charlotte reached over and extinguished the lamp. In the morning, light came early through the east-facing windows. The particular clear light of a July morning that arrives before the household has fully woken, when the only sounds are birds and the distant work of the stable yard. The kitchen maid left a single tray outside the drawing-room door at 6:30. 2 cups of tea, a small pot, the morning's newspaper folded beside it. Henry's daily list lay on the low table between the 2 desks, written in his own hand before any other task, in the quiet hour before Charlotte came downstairs. At the top of the list, before any name or errand or reminder, written in the careful, deliberate hand of a man who has learned to write the important things first. Charlotte. Below it, added that morning in Charlotte's hand, 2 words written in the same even script she had used for 28 years of garden journals and household accounts, and 1 small blue notebook she no longer needed. Still here,